This is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday. And today I'm welcoming my friend and co-person here at Channel 9, Alexa Ross, to talk about Ohio women.
Yeah, here we are.
That's a rather large topic, especially if you go back in history. But even just, what's going on right this minute sort of thing. And this is actually on the Green Weekend, which is a new thing that they're doing, which is kind of homecoming in the spring. Usually homecomings in the fall, football games, parades, that sort of thing. But this is the third year for On the Green Weekend, and a number of people have come back, and it's been fun meeting them. And I'm one myself in the sense that I have a degree from Ohio University dating to 1975 when I got a degree, and it was called government in those days, but it's more usually called political science.
Okay.
And then in 2007, I took some of the money that I had, well, actually I started in 2004, but it was 2007 I got a second degree at Ohio University in social sciences generally, but specifically in history, which is my...
So you have two masters?
I have two masters from Ohio University, and I have an earlier master from Michigan, University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, which is where I met my husband, a historian, and history was my major as an undergraduate.
Well, maybe 3 masters equals 1 PhD. What do you think?
That's what he tells people, which is kind of humorous, I guess. But
and a master's is a sexist term, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? On the other hand, think of the connotations for the word mistress.
Whoa! Don't go there.
You can see why they don't use that term. It's got another meaning. Well, anyway, one of the things I did as coming back to On the Green Weekend was to go to a history of Ohio University women, which was given this morning. Actually, it was also given yesterday, but Bill Kimmick, who is the archivist at the Alden Library, was the person who developed the whole program and had a lot of interesting slides, of people long ago, starting with Margaret Boyd, who was the first female student at Ohio University in 1869.
Well, I know in the stairwell they had an exhibit of prominent alums, but it seems like they were all males. Like
Oh, really?
Paul Newman. And
Oh, yes.
Arsenio Hall, was he another one of them?
Arsenio Hall. Well, there are certainly well-known people, especially in the field.
Cornelius Ryan?
Cornelius Ryan, yes, of course. And Cornelius Ryan there's a special exhibit. He left papers to Ohio University.
Right.
So, and he
Part
was a
of
special...
Hitler's urinal.
Part of Hitler's urinal. Which
let's get back to the women.
Yes. True. But there are people like in the entertainment field, someone like Doris Day, who...
She went to OU?
No, but she was born in Ohio.
Oh.
I'm talking about
Okay.
more generally,
All right.
state of Ohio women in
All
this
right.
case. Ruby Dee.
Oh,
Some of these people are,
I didn't know that.
from a wee bit of time in the past, of course, but the names I think are still familiar. Yeah, the program on the women at Ohio University was interesting, and he had, of course, lots of pictures from. In fact, the first the first black woman student was shortly after the time of Margaret Boyd in the 1870s. But she only came for one year. She didn't, finish a degree like Margaret Boyd did. But she was a Woodson, and that's a familiar name in the black community in southern Ohio. Ada Woodson Adams, who lives in Chester Hill. She was Woodson was her maiden name, and interestingly, her sister was one of the people who was just mentioned in passing in this talk that was given by Bill Kimmick. Because Alicia Woodson, who was one of Ada's sisters, was at one point president of the Ohio University student body. And she was mentioned in passing because she apparently was around right at the time that they had a revolt in 1969, I believe it was, against women's hours. Yeah.
Right.
We people who went perhaps a little earlier, I don't know, did you have hours when you went to college?
Yes, and you could only have men over from 2 to 5 on Sunday, and the door had to be open and 1 foot on the floor, that kind of thing.
1 foot on the floor. Well, that's an interesting one. We had hours at my undergraduate college, but they were quite, I realized later, going to other universities, that ours were really very liberal hours. 10:30 on weekdays, and freshmen didn't have that many, but they usually, you could stay out till 1:30 on Saturday night.
Wow.
And by the time you were a senior, you could stay out till 1:30 every night if you wanted.
Oh.
When would you ever get anything done?
No.
Because the library would be closed at that hour. They didn't have, night-long library hours.
Right. And how do you stay awake in your 8 o'clock classes?
Right. Very, very hard. Of course, I'm not sure whether 8 o'clock, for a while it seemed like 8 o'clock classes were being phased out. So many people didn't want to take them.
I know. I drink coffee and tea, and nothing could keep my head up.
Well, it worked, and sometimes it didn't work, right? Yeah. Plus, we used to have, we had classes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Right.
Or Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think an 8 o'clock on Saturday morning was the absolute worst. Wasn't it?
Well.
Right. I had a double problem because Stanford, where I went, in those days had the men on one side of the campus and the women safely far away on the other side of the campus, about a mile apart.
Wow.
Well, it was very convenient for the women because right across the street was the women's gym. But as it happened, the year that I went, they had one dorm over on the men's side had been changed into a women's dorm. I had an 8 o'clock class in the women's gym, so I had a mile to go in order to even get to the gym class. It was really grim.
I wonder with these big campuses how you can get from one class to another in 10 or 15 minutes.
It's really hard, and even OU, now that we have like 21,000 or 22,000 students on campus, at times when classes are changing, there are streams and streams of people crossing the streets and so on, and especially forget about Richland Avenue because the people have to go from West Green up to the main campus. They would go across Richland Avenue and all those cars have to stop.
That's right.
It's poses a certain problem. Well, anyway, Bill Kimmick spoke about the women on at Ohio University, and one of the people he talked about was Irma Voigt, who was the first dean of women here. And she came in the year 1913, obviously, 1913. But she was a real pioneer as a dean of women. And partly it was because Ohio University became a normal school, that is, teaching teachers, in 1902.
Oh.
And before that, there had been a lot fewer women. But after they started becoming a teacher's college, a lot, then the women came because so many of them were teachers who wanted to get more professional work, you know, maybe a 2-year teacher's specific certification.
I think my grandmother was a teacher in Arkansas, and you only had to have a high school degree to teach.
Yeah.
In the early part of the 20th century.
Right. Well, my grandmother was teacher. She was born in 1871, and she started teaching when she had finished high school, you know, and then she began taking summer classes at Kansas State in Emporia, which was the normal school for the state of Kansas. And finally, I guess after she'd taken, you know, like 3 or 4 summer school courses, she went for a final year. So she got the 2-year degree that a number of teachers had in the old days. And she was teaching, you know, when she got married, which was late. She was 27 or 28 when she married. And she had 8 children by the time she was 40.
Oh!
Right. Those were the good old days. You know, a child every other year or something like that.
Did they all survive?
Well, no. One baby boy died young when he was about 6 months, diphtheria or something.
Yeah.
And one boy child was killed in a farming accident.
Oh.
Horses ran away,
dear.
you know, with him. So that kind of cut him down a little bit, but still I had plenty of aunts and uncles. I know you have family around here too, don't you?
Yeah, I just had a new grandnephew.
How nice. Right, well, how did your folks happen to come to Southeast Ohio?
Well, my sister went to graduate school at OU.
I see.
In botany, and she met her husband, and now they have the Sassafras Farm, regulars at the farmer's market. So, like a lot of people who come to Southeast Ohio to go to Ohio U and stay. They do. That's why we're so progressive.
Right, and that's why it's a nice place to be. People think the beautiful hills of Southeast Ohio.
And it's supposed to have the most biological diversity in the United States. It's hard to believe. But
yeah, well, the Appalachian forests in general is considered to have this great biological diversity, even more so than jungles and stuff. I guess jungles are too hot for some things, maybe, and maybe that's the answer. And then, because of the way at one time, the ice sheet came down so far, that's why you find trees in Hocking County that are essentially from Canada.
Oh!
Because the seeds came down long ago, you know.
Okay.
And stayed down here, which is one of the nice things about Hocking County.
We're all invaders. We're all invasive
We are,
species.
we are all invaders. And for that matter, the American Indians were invaders in their time too. I mean, they say about 13,000 BC
From
probably.
Asia?
From
the
Asia.
Bering Strait?
Yeah, yeah. So we're all pioneers, I guess, in some way or other. Well, I wanted to show you this book, Profiles of Ohio Women. And
200 years,
Yeah,
wow.
this is, well, Ohio began in 1803, so this was the bicentennial year. And most of the women are actually from the 20th century, but there are, well, I think maybe the only one from the 18th century was Betty Zane. Zanesville is named for her family.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought it was Zane Grey.
Right. Well, he was
Oh,
of
Maggie
the same
Kuhn.
pioneer family.
Maggie Kuhn of the
The
Gray Panthers.
Gray Panthers.
Yeah.
Gray Panthers. Yeah, there are a lot of people that you didn't realize actually were born in Ohio or are associated in some way with Ohio.
That's right.
They have them divided up according to different things, but
Right.
one of the categories I'm interested in is political women. And there are some that you think might be political women that aren't listed in the political women category. And the one I'm thinking of specifically is Victoria Woodhull, who was a 19th century woman who was the first woman who seriously ran for president of the United States. That was in 1872.
Well, here's Harriet Beecher Stowe.
Oh, yes. Well, of course, she's usually associated with the New England, but that was because her parents came out to Cincinnati, and she married a man in Cincinnati, and her whole idea for her most famous book was because Cincinnati was right across the river from slave territory in Kentucky.
Right. Toni Morrison, Nikki Giovanni.
Yeah,
I didn't realize.
right. We're quite a snooty state. We can put up our noses and boast a lot about some of these people. Of course, there are a lot of women that many people haven't heard of. There's one right there that says Law and Government. This is one of my favorite people, Florence Ellenwood Allen. She was a pioneer judge in Ohio, and she was the first woman on the Ohio Supreme Court as early as 1922. She was on the Ohio Supreme Court. Of course, the only problem with that is that after her time, it was like about 70 years before they had another woman on the Ohio Supreme Court.
Elizabeth Blackwell, I know of a medical center in Philadelphia. She must have been a pioneer in women's health.
Yes, she was, and a doctor, an early woman doctor. So, see, there's a whole section on healthcare people.
Can you tell me why Ohio became Republican when it was Democrat for so many years?
Well, it's one of those swing states. It's both Republican and Democrat. For instance, before we moved to Ohio, we came in 1964, but in 1958, the Republicans passed a right-to-work law, and the Democrats rose up in fury, and took
Which is
the
not a
state
good
back.
name for it.
Yeah, right.
It's a union-busting law.
Right to shirk, you might say, right to shirk being a union member, because right to work has to do with not needing to join a union.
Oh.
And well, and I was thinking, Back in the 80s, we had a Democratic governor for quite a long time. Celeste was his name in the 1980s. And then as recently as 2006, Ted Strickland, who's currently running for the U.S. Senate against the incumbent Rob Portman. In 2006, Ted Strickland was elected governor, and he's a Democrat. He was in fact, our congressperson down in this part of Ohio.
And now he's running for senator.
Now he's running for senator.
Kathy Gooseweet of the cartoon Kathy. Didn't know she was an Ohioan.
Right. Well, like I say, we've got quite a few famous women there, actually.
Maya Lin, of course, Athens County.
Yes, Maya Lin.
The Vietnam Memorial.
In the back, they have an area that sort of, helps you look for specific people. They have both a list in the index, of course, of all the people, all the women in here.
And by county.
Then they have them by area, see?
And county.
This is Southeast Ohio, and
Right.
these are all women from Southeast Ohio. 4 from Athens County, including Maya Lin.
Phyllis Diller was from West Central Ohio.
Yeah.
Ah. Well.
Yeah, we...
And Berenice Abbott, she's a famous photographer.
Yes. This is, the dairy barn here at, in Athens. This is a picture of Harriet Anderson. And she and her husband were the ones that saved the dairy barn. They were about to tear it down,
In 1977, yes.
And this would make a nice space for, and it certainly has.
Yes.
Wonderful art museum now.
Lillian Gish.
Yes, we had, do you know, have you ever seen Halle Berry?
Yes.
Halle Berry?
Yes.
She's one too.
Doris Day, Ruby
Doris
Dee. My
Day
goodness.
And Ruby Dee. Right.
Rosemary Clooney. Who knew? Yeah, here's Halle Berry.
There's Halle Berry.
Cuyahoga County.
Yeah.
Wow.
Stage and screen, that's the section on stage and screen. So there are quite a few nationally known names in here. Most of them from the 20th century, but there are some from the 19th century as well. Harriet Taylor Upton was a famous woman who was in favor of women's suffrage. And in fact, the National Women's Suffrage Organization had its headquarters in Ohio, in her hometown, for a number of years before women's suffrage was actually passed.
Says she founded the League of Women Voters.
Yeah, she was one of the founders.
And she lost her home in a sheriff's sale.
Oh, dear. Yeah, that sounds like she got to be a poor old lady eventually. She'd been a widow for a number of years by then.
Wow, this is a fascinating book.
Yeah, you can.
And you were telling me before we went on air, Eleanor Schmiel.
Yes,
of
Ellen
Now.
Schmiel of Now, the well-known founder of National Organization for Women, is an Ohio native. She came from the Northeast, I'm pretty sure, maybe near Ashtabula. Yeah,
And Faye Waddleton of Planned Parenthood
yes,
fame.
long time Planned Parenthood CEO, a black woman from Dayton, nurse, was the head of Planned Parenthood for many years. So, yeah, profiles of Ohio women. And this book was published at Ohio University.
Well, good for them.
Yeah. Although the people who made it, who brought it together, were mostly people from Columbus or people who had connections in Columbus, like the woman whose picture is here.
Mm-hmm.
She's a black lady who's an academic in Columbus.
Mm-hmm. This is an Ohio Bicentennial Legacy Project.
Right, right. And I know some of the folks who worked on getting that book together, which is now, 15 years ago probably they started in on it because it was published in 2003
Right.
for the bicentennial.
Mm-hmm.
Right, it's a fascinating book, and I know they have a copy, and nearly all the libraries in the state have a copy of that book, and so it's something that people can refer to.
Wonderful.
I've got another copy that I bought a copy and then someone gave me a copy, which I am hoping to get eventually to Ada Woodson Adams, who lives in Chester Hill. And they have a place there that was on the Underground Railroad.
Uh-huh.
And they have a little library in the old house that is their center for the Underground Railroad activities. And I mentioned Ada's sister, Alicia Woodson, who was a black woman who was the one who was in on this all-night affair when the women at Ohio University rebelled against ours. There we are, right back to where we started from.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, right. Well, some of the ones that we've mentioned, Gloria Steinem too.
Right.
Right. She's from Toledo area.
Oh.
Her grandmother was working on women's issues, long before Gloria appeared on the scene even. And one of the interesting features here is that, people nominated women. And so they have the 200 women who were actually chosen. And then they have a list here of people who didn't make it,
Oh.
Other notable women.
Ah.
A number of them are people who are quite well known today, or, well, Boyd A. Margaret. I don't know, I think maybe that's our Margaret Boyd. But Kathleen Barber, people that I remember meeting, long ago, like the lady who was in charge of the state women's meeting in 1977. There she is. Mary Miller was her name, and then later she married again when she was a widow, and so now she's listed under Young. But you can see that there were many, many. Agnes Merritt, I remember her.
And there's a whole page of women who have served as first ladies?
Well, these are Ohio first ladies.
Oh, not national.
But
first ladies of the United States.
They also
yes.
have first
There's
ladies.
7 of them, and at the International Women's Day, you
Right.
presented their
Right, I presented
images and
their names,
stories.
and their pictures were found by women who were working at the Women's Center. So that
I
was
wonder
really
how
nice.
Ohio became so important in the electoral process. Is
Well,
it so populous or so
yeah.
industrialized?
Right, and of course, Ohio's population has shrunk. In the 50 years that we have lived here, it was about 11 million when we came, and I think it's down now to 9 point something million.
Oh, where did they go?
Well, I don't know. They moved to Florida. They moved to the Southwest.
Right.
Who knows? They moved elsewhere, and including a number of these women that we see in this book,
Oh, yes.
who actually made their names elsewhere
Right.
than Ohio itself, but were born here. So, and it was a crossroads, It was the first place that was settled across the Appalachian Mountains. People came in 1788 to Marietta and Cincinnati, and you know, just growed from there, so to speak. Yeah, one of the ones who's listed here in the southeast section is a woman that I've specialized on, Frances Dana Gage. Her grandparents were among these first settlers in Marietta in 1789. And she herself lived from about 1808 to the 1880s. But she had three big interests. One was abolition, one was temperance, and one was women's rights. And she worked in all three of those areas. She wrote for the Cultivator, the Ohio Cultivator, and she wrote poetry, and she was the chairman at the women's meeting in 1851 where Sojourner Truth spoke. And so I don't think they have Sojourner Truth in here, although she's, you know, particularly famous for that meeting.
Maybe she wasn't born here.
No, she wasn't. She was, as a matter of fact, she was born in New York State on the Hudson River, and her first language was Dutch. She was born a slave, a black slave, but they had slavery in New York State until 1827.
Oh.
So she was freed in 1827 from slavery, but then she became this itinerant preacher who took the name Sojourner Truth.
Oh.
Yeah. And, ain't I a woman? And some people today think that she didn't even say that.
Oh.
Who knows? But and that's based on the fact that the man who wrote the first account at the time didn't put that phrase in. And it was Frances Dana Gage's account that was written up later that included the "ain't I a woman" phrase.
Oh.
You know, yeah.
Well, Suzanne Farrell, the ballerina.
Yes.
Everything.
Right, and these people are all people that I can remember. We mentioned Harriet Anderson and Dairy Barn. Eusebia Hunkins was a musician and composer.
Oh.
And she's been gone now a long time. She died in about 1978, I guess. But she lived in a house on College Street that is now a fraternity house.
Oh.
Her husband at one time was the Dean of Men at Ohio University. So she was around definitely, and Maya Lin. Barbara Ross Lee was a little before your time, I think. She was head of the osteopathic college for a while. And she's actually associated with, there's a famous black singer or musician, woman musician, whose name is Ross, who's from Detroit area.
Oh.
And she's from that same family.
Oh.
And in fact, when she left Ohio U, she went to another college, another medical college, as president of that medical college. So those are all people from Athens County. And then in addition to Frances Dana Gage for Washington County, here's Nancy Hollister. She is one of the political firsts in Ohio. She's from a Marietta family that was a pioneer family, and she was mayor of Marietta, and she was the first woman lieutenant governor.
Mm.
That was back in the 90s. She was a lieutenant governor under George Voinovich.
Wow.
Yeah. Voinovich himself is an Ohio University graduate.
Mm-hmm.
So up at the library, they have a room. In fact, where we met this morning is the George Voinovich room that has, plaques on the wall and things that, because he left papers for Ohio University, and so
Right.
they have things that remember him.
And there's an active organization or social work school, the Voinovich.
Yes, right, yeah. The environmental, I think it's the environmental group up in the ridges.
Yes.
That's
Right.
the Voinovich,
Yeah.
named for him. And he was before the time that we moved to Ohio, because he was actually a graduate like about 1958 or 59. And then he went on, to elsewhere. I think he was mayor of Cleveland before he became governor. And so he was probably already from the northeast part of Ohio. But like I say, they do have these people divided up so you can find who the well-known folks are from your territory, which is an interesting thing to check on.
Kathleen Battle, the opera singer.
Yes, Kathleen Battle. It's interesting.
Nancy Wilson sings jazz.
Does she? Kathleen Battle was at the Metropolitan Opera for a number of years, and eventually she got decommissioned or whatever. She became too much of a diva, they say.
Right. What do you expect?
She sort of was kind of running things her way, and but then she continued to sing, of course. She did a lot of touring and singing classical music and so forth. She's from Portsmouth. Yeah, Kathleen Battle, and I just read that she is going to be back at the Met for a particular performance in December of this year.
Oh.
It'll be her first time back at the Met since in about 20 years, actually.
Oh.
But,
Speaking of history, last night there was a meeting at the community center.
yeah,
Building doctors, and they're from the from the state to advise people who have older houses on how to keep them up and restore, rehabilitate.
Right.
It was just fascinating because I have an old house. And
yeah. Well, I should have been there because I've got an old house too.
well, water is the #1 enemy.
Oh, right. I can believe that.
It was very interesting. Don't plant plants right next to your house.
Yeah. Well, that is a problem, isn't it? I was just noticing that we're going to have to start cutting back some of those things that are close to our house. Yes. And our house is very close to the one next to it because it's in that section of Athens where the houses were built very close together originally.
And all these ivy-covered buildings, they're being destroyed by the ivy. It's very hard on brick.
But it's so pretty.
Yes, there's a lot to learn. Yeah. Things are a lot more complicated than you think.
Yeah, that's right. You gotta watch it because you never can tell that. Good-looking ivy may be just sucking the brick out of the bricks.
That's right.
Whatever.
And you should inspect your house twice a year. And if it's raining, see where that water goes.
Yes. Well, we right here on Channel 9, we're having a bit of a problem ourselves.
That's right.
Isn't that something? But apparently that's because something moved in with a washing machine.
Right.
Uh-oh.
Water will out.
Water will out, and washing machines especially, I guess, washing machines and dishwashing machines, because they're very nice to have, but on the other hand, it's kind of like fracking, you know. The fracking does its business by being water being pumped down under tremendous pressure, which is necessary if it's going to break up the shale, you know. And let loose the little bits of gas and so forth. That's what fracking is all about. Goodness knows we have enough problems with fracking and injection wells especially. We don't have any fracking locally.
Right.
But
we have new regulations about methane recovery, so if that can be commonplace,
Yes.
there's a little bit of hope.
there is, right. But methane is much stronger than carbon dioxide.
Oh, yes.
They say something like 15 times as strong as carbon
Right.
dioxide in making, you know, acidification in the atmosphere and so on. So, well, it keeps us all very busy working on things like that, doesn't it? You know, I'm not sure whether they have a group of scientists. I'll have to check and see if they've got a group of women scientists.
Yes,
You'd
they have
think they
sports and
sports and people in
entertainment.
film and entertainment and so on. Healthcare, law and government, literature,
Religion.
military service, even. One of the interesting people that I remember checking on was a black woman who has served as a judge, and she has even served. I think they said she was the only black woman who had ever been in the Marine Corps judiciary.
Wow. A few good men, huh?
A few good men and a few good women,
And
too.
one good woman.
For sure. Well, your father was in the military,
Yes,
wasn't he? Yeah. A lot of people stayed in after World War II and after the Korean War, especially people who had been in World War II and then were in the Korean War, and they figured, hey, I've been in so long, I might as well stay.
Well, he was a West Pointer. He went,
was he?
He went to college for 4 years. Aggies, agricultural and mining in Colorado, and then he was appointed to West Point. So he was a career officer.
I see.
Fifth Army.
Yeah, right.
But upon retiring, he became a peace activist. So I'm very proud of him, and a Unitarian.
My goodness, he...
And his mother was an active WCTUer, so...
Oh, really? Well, Women's Christian Temperance Union was very strong in Ohio at one time, in the 1870s especially, and 1880s. And the women who founded the WCTU, you know, a number of them were from Ohio. So, yeah.
It's a complicated story. I think
is.
Ken Burns had a documentary about it.
I guess I missed that one.
Well, the whole prohibition movement kind of
yes.
fostered organized crime, so
Yeah. Among other things, although one of the things that people don't properly realize is that drinking did go down tremendously during Prohibition. But illegal drinking obviously went up.
And poisoning from home brew and blindness, all kinds of catastrophes.
Not too good things, that's for sure. Well, you know, there were so many people who were, men especially, men particularly, really heavy drinkers in the 19th century, and you know, they didn't make much money, and then they would drink it up at the saloon. And meanwhile, the children are starving and so forth, which was one of the reasons why temperance was such a big issue for people like Frances Dana Gage. She didn't, I don't think she had private, reasons for it. I don't know that there was anyone in her family who was really a heavy drinker, but that was definitely one of her big issues. One of her triune cause was the liquor business. Well, let's see here. Some of the other political women that I've got listed here, people who were the firsts of something or other, Well, like Frances Ellen Wood Allen that I mentioned, that was this first judge and first on the Ohio Supreme Court, first woman on the federal bench, and she was named by FDR in 1934 to the federal bench. And so eventually she became the first chief circuit judge woman. But she had to be on the bench for a long time before that happened.
Well, we could probably thank Eleanor Roosevelt for her influence.
Oh yes, right. She's one of my heroines, because I really remember her. I was born in 1932, which was the year that FDR was still governor of New York.
Oh.
And was proposed for the Democratic nomination, and of course the Republicans were in the doghouse because of the Great Depression at the time. And so, and she did a column, My Day.
Yes.
I used to read it when I was a girl, because it was syndicated in many newspapers. And you sometimes wonder how she was able to do all the things that she did do, just all her travels, and because she did so much that was sort of the eyes and ears for her husband, since he was, because of polio, he couldn't walk, really. Although we didn't notice it in those days.
Wonderful.
Of course, one thing is, in those days there was less focus on things. I mean, look at poor old Bill Clinton and the troubles he's had with Monica Lewinsky and so forth. Whereas, Kennedy is almost considered a saint, and they say that if anything, he was much more of a womanizer than
I wanted
Bill Clinton.
to ask you where all this animus against Hillary Clinton comes from.
Oh, yes.
Because I remember when she talked about the vast right-wing conspiracy, and that does sound a little out there, but I think it's true. And then you look at all the opposition that Obama faced in his presidency.
Right, yeah, that's
Just
true.
couldn't do anything.
Well, politics, of course, has always been somewhat that way. Yeah, you always have your partisans on one side or the other, and but I don't know. The Clintons were not born with a silver spoon in their mouth. I mean, here, look at this. Look at Mr. Trump.
Oh, dear.
He was born with a silver spoon in his mouth. But you never guess it, because he seems to be so sort of vulgar, and and says the first thing that comes in his mind, which is often not maybe something that he should be saying.
And you saw that article in the A News that he's a narcissist. I mean, he has a mental disease practically in his supreme egoism.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's hard to tell where partisan anti stuff starts and ends, but he has already made such a kind of a bad name for himself with the things that he said himself, that he has not thought twice about saying. I don't know, but when the Clintons first came to, of course, they were, Bill Clinton was not, did not get a majority of the votes because there was a three-way race when he ran in '92.
Ross
And
Perot?
Ross Perot.
Oh, yes.
Ross Perot got 20% of the votes.
Wow.
And George W. Bush, who was the incumbent president, got about 36 or something like that. And Clinton was like 44 or something along that line. So he was kind of like Trump. I mean, Trump has been, for some months at least, he was definitely not in the majority. Might be in the early 40s or whatever. But.
I'm really surprised as a former Floridian that Jeb didn't do better.
Ah, yeah. Well, they say he didn't run a very good campaign. I don't know. Yeah.
A lot of money went by the wayside.
A lot of Floridians were backing him, you mean, you think?
Well, I don't know who was backing him, but they're out of pocket.
Yeah, they're out of pocket. And that's one of the terrible things is how much money it takes nowadays.
Oh, this has got to change.
Yeah.
And why should it take years to work through these campaigns? Why can't it take a month?
Oh.
Well,
I
partly
hope Citizens United, yes, that was 2010, and since then the amount of unknown money, dark money, they say is there are hundreds of PACs now.
Right,
Political Action Committee.
Whoever gets in spends all their time on the phone raising money for the next election.
It's terrible, really
They're
terrible.
guaranteed income for life, and they don't have to do a thing. And they might run on an anti-government platform and then get in and just obstruct everything.
Well, they keep saying we've got to stop the IRS and so forth. There are a lot of people out there who are anti-political these days, that's for sure. And yet there are a lot of Ohio women who made their name in politics and really did quite well. One of those is Mary Ellen Withrow. I bet you haven't heard her name because it's sort of before your time. But she was a Democrat, and I remember meeting her at one point at some Democratic meeting. So I pulled out this was probably in the 1990s, I pulled out my purse and I took out a $1 bill and I asked her to sign it for me because she was Treasurer of the United States.
Oh.
Her name, her signature
was already on it?
Was already on, on the bill, you know.
Did she comply?
Oh, yes, yeah, she wrote her name very nicely. I don't know, I put it in the safe deposit box or something like that. I knew it was something I didn't want to spend.
Right.
But she was the only person so far who has become Treasurer of the United States who had been Treasurer of her county, which was Marion County, Ohio. Treasurer of Ohio. She was Treasurer of Ohio for like 8 years or so. Oh. And then she was named by Bill Clinton to be Treasurer of the United States. So she was Treasurer of the United States for about 8 years, from 93 till 2001.
I'm thinking of Frances Perkins, was it? An FDR appointee. What was her?
She was Secretary of Labor. But she was from New York State, and she had had an important job in that area, commerce and labor, in New York before she was named. And she was Secretary of Labor the whole time he was president, the 12 years or so that he was president, Frances Perkins. Yeah. Well, there are folks around like that, women around like that.
It's famous up to the women. I have a poster of Eleanor Roosevelt.
Do you really?
Wood cut. It's up to the women. And I think it really is, because we are the majority. And
Yes, just barely.
we're not so likely to start wars, although
Oh,
there
that's
are
true.
the exceptions like Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, yeah, there are some who are pretty
Phyllis
bloodthirsty,
Schlafly.
they say. Yeah, Phyllis Schlafly and the conservative wing of the American women's groups. Yes, indeed.
Well, let's bring conservation back into conservatism.
Yes, that's very important. That's what Theodore Roosevelt wanted. He was a Republican and a conservationist, and one of the people who really began the conservation movement, in a sense, over 100 years ago.
Yes.
So, yes, indeed. Well, we're getting right down to the very end here, and we've been talking a lot about the different women. I want to point out this magazine. Are you familiar with Yes magazine?
No!
No! Yes magazine is available at the public library, and it's been going for about 20 years, and they have different themes. This month it's gender justice, so it's going to have a lot in it about women and women's rights and women's concerns. So check it out at the public library. Yes is its name. And thanks so much for being on the program with me, Alexa.
Oh, it's always wonderful.
We can just talk on and on about women and other topics.
Yay!
Alexa Ross has been my guest today, and this is Lois Whaley for Women Today and Yesterday.